Hi, everyone, and welcome to AB Conversations, where we will help you CFP your way out of it. A podcast where you get into the minds of a couple certified financial planners on how we think and feel about everyday financial planning questions and what should really matter most to you. A healthier financial life starts now. Here we go. Into podcast time again. Adam, how are you today?
I'm doing just great. How are you?
The sun is shining. We are embarking on a 4-day weekend. So
Yeah,
super excited to record a fun podcast with you and then get the heck out of here. Enjoy the weekend.
yeah. Recording it right before 4th of July. Supposedly the sun is supposed to be out for like days at a time moving
I
forward,
don't
which is a
I
nice
don't
nice
believe that.
reprieve. I did actually
I've
see.
heard
Yeah,
I've heard
I was
that
gonna get it.
before.
Yeah, I was gonna say I'm pretty sure this morning my wife looked at the weather and said, "Guess what? It's supposed to rain again after the way home commute." It's like, of course it is.
Yeah, right. So
Good.
hard pivot
Yeah,
into a topic today. It's going to be a little investment focused, but of course, being who we are, the key here is to focus on the planning around the investment. So here's the cold hard truth. You can average the 6-7% rate of return. Sometimes we'll put into our planning projections based on how somebody might be allocated, and you could still
hmm
run out of money. And there's two reasons for that. Some people would, quickly jump to, yes, what I'm withdrawing matters, but the sequence of you returning the positive 6-7%, that's an average. If there are
yeah,
some negative years when you're withdrawing money and then positive years, the sequence in which you have those returns is actually a really big risk to the portfolio. So let's just talk about the smart planning around that to hopefully help people stay confident that volatile markets don't need to completely derail their plan.
yeah. So maybe just diving in a little bit deeper on what does that really mean? Yeah, I guess I'll give an example. Right? We'll start there. I think most people understand that if I'll say in this scenario, not taking withdrawals, just the plain math on if I had $1 million, I lost 10% in a year. Now I'm at 900,000. For me to get back to a million that following year, I need to earn more than that 10% that I lost. Because if I only earn 10%, now I'm at 990. I'm
Right.
short
Yep.
of my $1 million, right? So when you lose, you need to gain a little bit more to get back to your original number. But that gets compounded
Yeah.
by withdrawals. So to your point, that's where this sequence of when those good years or when maybe those bad years are happening while you're taking withdrawals can really have a big impact. So I'll lay out a similar example. Start with $1 million, market is down 10%, or you lose 10% in that given calendar year. Now you're at 900,000, but you're also taking a 5% withdrawal on your $1 million. So now you also took out 50,000. The end of the year, you're down to 850. Now next year, what do I have to earn to hopefully maybe get back to my original $1 million? Well, it's not just I need to make up the 150,000 now that I took out and lost, but I'm going to take out another 50,000 if that's what I need in
Yeah.
retirement. So now I'm basically at 800,000. I really need to earn like 25% that following year to hopefully get me back to what was, ground zero, step one of, baseline. So that's where some potentially negative years early can really have long-term impacts.
Yeah. And of course, that's a snapshot in time of like 2 years.
Right.
But I really like the point that you're making because that is going to compound over longer periods of time. Like, so we could use a different example. If two different investors earned the same amount of like the same percentage of returns over consecutive years, like 15%, 5%, 0%, -5 and -15, right? Put that all together, you went nowhere. If you were on the wrong side of this and year one was your -15 and year five was your +15, you end up on your $1 million example, you end up somewhere around like 680, 690,000. But if you flip that and you had your positive years first, and it's the same sequence of returns, and -15 was your last year, you're up at like
hmm
760, right? So there's almost like a 10% difference there when you had the same rates of return. So what we're really trying to illustrate here is we can talk about long-term averages, but really it's the timing of your withdrawals that can become an issue And that's what we want to talk about today. What can we do to kind of negate that in some ways?
Yeah, I think it speaks to just the danger of using long-term averages for the reality of retirement for
Yeah,
many people, right? We
real
don't,
world timelines.
yeah, we don't live in that vacuum where if we could get 6 or 7% a year with regularity, that makes the planning process super easy. It becomes just an equation, right? We just need to solve it. But yeah, the reality of the situation is it just life does not work that way. Markets do not behave rationally at all times. So that's where, again, we just have to, what are those ways to mitigate it?
I think there's actually, like, if we can stay here real quickly, there's actually people that are maybe more vulnerable to this.
Sure.
Like, we'll just start with what we were identifying. If you maybe need to take larger withdrawals early in retirement, and that's when those, I guess, tough markets are happening and you aren't positioned
Yeah.
for that, right? That's clearly somebody that's going to be a little bit more vulnerable to that.
Yeah. Yeah. Another example would be if in a scenario, and I think it really does come back to that withdrawal rate being one of the bigger driving factors, right? But someone that may just retire a little bit earlier and therefore has a longer time in retirement, you're just exposing yourself to more opportunity for that sequence of return to kind of move your retirement success around.
I'd also throw into that camp people. We meet some people that have done an awesome job, I would say, just being investors, like set it, forget it investors that lean heavily into equity and stock exposure because they're like,
Yeah.
hey, I know growth is going to happen over time. Like behaviorally, they have the right profile. But then,
Yeah.
they come to us ready to retire and they've got 100% in equity, right? They, of course, then, if they're going to need to rely on that portfolio, are going to be vulnerable to the whims of, well, what's the market going to do in that first year of retirement? Is it a bad year for stocks? Is it a good year?
Yeah. That level of volatility can be heightened with a more concentrated portfolio or just, yeah, a more stock heavy or maybe not as quite diversified portfolio that should help smooth out some of those fluctuations over time. So, how do we actually help strategize around that? Like, how do we start to insulate ourselves or our clients from some of that risk? Number one is just having an appropriate buffer in
Yeah.
terms of cash flow, right? Savings. And this goes into kind of the our three bucket theory, right? Bucket one being, hey, have cash, have 1 to 2 years worth of expenses in either cash or very short term bonds so that if you're in a scenario where the first year or two of your retirement while you're taking withdrawals the market is not in good shape, you're pulling from cash and hopefully allowing your investments to recoup any losses that have occurred. And why 1 to 2 years? Because the typical pullback lasts anywhere from that 1 to 2 years, 18 months. But even what we've seen more recently is that timeline has greatly shrunken for pullbacks. I mean, we'll just use this year, right? Different scenarios every time it happens, but you look at what happened from basically February to April, and the market was down almost 20% from its peak.
Yeah.
And here we are, not even 3 full months later, and the market has not only eclipsed that loss, but now we're hitting all-time highs yet again. So that 1 to 2 years worth of cash hopefully allows a lot of people to just buy time to not have to touch their investments that are fluctuating with the market.
Yeah, and replenish that cash. So I'm thinking logistically, okay, how do we as planners help? One example is, again, we felt pretty good
Mm,
about the market where it was at the end of last year. And whether you call this a rebalance or not, and we can talk about, two different examples here. People that we know are in this withdrawal phase, right? The people we're talking about potentially being vulnerable or
mm,
being forced to take distributions, the required minimum distributions. We
yeah.
in December just might have said, hey, let's take some of our gains off the table. We had a good year and let's put that into cash. And that's going to buy us the time that if the market does have, as it did, right? We're not going to get this right every time, but as it did, had a
Right.
bad first quarter, we didn't have to be generating cash during a very volatile time, right? It's the same reason using the example of a 100% equity investor that's ready to retire.
Mm.
Hey, now's a really good time to maybe rebalance your account, take some of that stock off the table, some of those gains, and put it into cash, knowing that we think you're going to spend it next year.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of people, and I think it kind of runs the gamut, and people fall on different ends of this spectrum. For some people, the idea of like that opportunity loss, like I'm gonna
Yeah.
build cash, just feels doesn't feel good, right? But if the market is still gaining, then I should have just left it all in. But that's not in our mind. That's not the purpose. It is really, this maybe just speaks to who we are. We're planners. How could this go awry? And oftentimes it is just which one would feel worse? Is it giving up maybe some opportunity? Or if in a scenario where the market is down and now you're needing to take withdrawals, more often than not, I think that feels worse to most people. But it
Yeah.
is still something to navigate, right? That idea of, but I'm building cash, but it's not doing anything. It is doing something for your plan, but maybe not earning as much as you may want it to. But that's not necessarily its primary purpose at that point.
Yeah, and let's not even put ourselves in that spot is what we would say as planners. Like
Right.
statistically, we know psychologically that feeling of pain from making the bad call usually is much bigger than the euphoria from, hey, I eked out a little bit more gain. So yeah,
Yeah.
cash, that's number one.
Yeah.
I'll give a second example in planning. I think
Sure.
just like we wouldn't want to just say, here are your average returns, we want to be cognizant of like what your withdrawal strategy really could be year to year and wanting to recognize that could be a little bit more dynamic. There is a difference between filling your needs versus your wants or the wish list. So if we approach some of your withdrawal strategy being kind of like the guardrails approach, if the portfolio's up, okay, here's what we're going to take out. And it might be increasing spending in those years. If it's down,
Mhm.
then maybe we lean back and temporarily cut on some of those wish list things. So in the example you were using earlier, if it's the math of taking $50,000 a year, maybe we're flexing
Mhm.
between 40 and 60, right? Just to hopefully sustain the portfolio in times when things aren't going well.
Yeah. I feel like we may have shared this in other versions of the podcast too, where we have a client or maybe several clients at this point that kind of have gotten used to while they were working and earning, right, getting a bonus. And that for many people, when there is a bonus, like that is mentally accounted for separately than, my typical income that covers my normal expenses that can help fill that wish list. So in the scenario where there are gains, we want to make sure that we are taking those gains and passing them forward, right? Going back to what you had said earlier, making sure that we are replenishing that cash buffer from the things when they are doing well, when the market is hitting all time highs, that's usually a decent time to carve off some of those gains
Yeah.
and help replenish that cash component. Because ultimately, I know we've described this in different versions, talking about the three bucket theory. That should really work like a conveyor belt, right? You have your
Yeah.
gains and your long term growth, and you just continue to pass those forward to your middle bucket. Then your middle bucket fills your cash bucket. And hopefully, you can get that where more often than not, it's essentially in an ideal world, that's a self sustaining kind of process. Doesn't always work that way, but still going through that exercise to make sure that you are taking those gains when they're there and not just letting things ride forever, because we know people are going, more often than not, people are going to spend, and we need to make sure that's in a safe and protected spot when they need it.
Yeah. And what came to mind there, Adam, as you're talking about that, we are really just trying to eliminate the timing of all of this. And that's how big institutions do it. Like, how do big endowments do it when that is their income source? Like, it's these portfolios. They'll take like rolling 3-year returns or rolling 5-year returns, and that's how they develop their withdrawal strategy to like fill their budgets, right? These institutions can't just stop spending because there's one bad year in the market,
Right.
right? So they're trying to average out the look of their returns for their spending.
Yeah. So another way, and this doesn't work for everybody, but it's a very simplified way of looking at it, just living off of the income that your portfolio is producing, right? You're not hopefully not touching principal in that scenario. Then theoretically, it's irrelevant what the values are at any given point in time, as long as it's generating the income that you need or want
Yeah,
in
definitely a
retirement. And
strategy.
yeah, you're just living off the interest. And in theory, that pretty much eliminates that sequence of return risk because you're only living off of what it's producing without worrying about the fluctuation.
Yeah, and I'd say it's more common for us to see or recommend that be combined with that idea of also taking gains when you have it. Like there is a
Yeah.
role in rebalancing. But yeah, that's a good one too. So I think the last planning topic that we'd really talk about is really being I guess, tax aware in your withdrawal strategy, right? Trying to limit the bite of taxes. And that just comes back to there's not only this three bucket theory on how we separate our investments between cash and fixed income and equities, but there's different tax buckets too. There's the taxable bucket. We'll call that like non-retirement in this brief conversation. There's the IRA bucket, right, where you're going to continue to pay income taxes on retirement accounts. But then there's a tax-free bucket. So I don't know, maybe we can go back and forth here. There
Hmm.
definitely is a part of our process that would say your withdrawal strategy should also be combined with a tax-aware withdrawal strategy.
Yeah, for sure. And it's going to be different for every situation, but more often than not, for people that are maybe on the earlier side of retirement, that typically lends itself to hopefully building that non-retirement bucket because that is the least, or maybe I'll frame it a different way. That is the most tax efficient way without leaning on your retirement account to get access to some savings in a minimally impactful tax side of
Yeah.
things.
Yeah, so I think like let's play out a scenario because we do have some of these clients, and I would hope people listening to this podcast like think about diversifying where they save too. If you're in that camp where you retire early and you're able to then rely on those taxable accounts, right? You're not paying ordinary income tax on that money. That gives you so many other options, right? Because a lot of retirement planning should be trying to think about what do I do in my lower tax years, which hopefully come right after you retire, right? You leave peak earnings. Now you're controlling your income tax bracket. If I'm living off of my savings, that taxable bucket, we're big fans of converting IRA funds to Roth IRA funds during low income years, right? And if you
Yeah.
do that, not only is that keeping you in a lower tax bracket, but by combining that with a Roth IRA conversion, you're helping reduce income taxes that might spike later because you have to take required minimum distributions.
Yeah. Well, and it's that domino effect then at that point, and we certainly have seen this in practice for people that may have done a great job of saving into that pre-tax retirement account. It can become its own animal, right? And once you hit that RMD age, it's kind of hard to navigate that. You lost a lot of that flexibility at that point. And then again, it has that compounding effect of, okay, now if my RMD is going to push me into a new tax bracket, that could also lead to paying more on your capital gains in a non-retirement account. Could
Hmm.
put you in that situation where now you're paying more for your Medicare because it's pushing you into that higher income bracket. Like it's this again, just nothing with planning, nothing usually happens in a vacuum. There are often a lot of these little dominoes that happen along the way as well.
Right. That might help you defer your Social Security, right? If you have
Sure.
access to that bucket. All, of course, this all requires you actually proactively saving into that type of environment. But
Mhm.
maybe I should have started here. It's just to realize that if, going back to our example, if client says or we determine through planning you need to take out $50,000 a year, well, if that's coming from a retirement account, we're not taking out 50,000. We have to take out
Right.
what, 60,000 withholding 10 for taxes? Like it's more
Sure.
than so as you kind of are creating wealth, if you're able to have these different buckets, you really are then controlling the net of what you truly need to withdraw.
Yeah. And in an ideal world, that's where we can try to strategize where we're taking a little bit from column A and a little bit from column B, and maybe we look at column C to try to maximize the efficiency when it comes to not only just the taxes, but then that can trickle over to the investment implications as well.
So I've got one more thing that I would say, and I realize I'm going to
Mm.
reiterate some things we've said recently, but it's really important for your withdrawal strategy to just be proactive in thinking about what lifestyle shifts might be occurring in your life, right? If that's changing a living situation, needing care, wanting to help others. The reality is we certainly have clients and we can try to be very proactive in planning. But when you have to now make a quick decision on something in life, it is often the case that you are just limiting your choices. And if
Sure.
now you need to take care of something during a downtime when you weren't prepared for it, again, that's going to be where this sequence of return risk is really going to slap you.
Yeah. Yeah. So maybe to kind of summarize maybe the main point or the kind of the main takeaway. Market timing isn't necessarily the main issue, but the timing of withdrawals and maybe the quantity of withdrawals are kind of the deciding factor. Again, they work in concert. Sometimes it works okay. And we've seen this, right? The last few years have been generally very good for market returns. And I think for people that may have started with a higher withdrawal rate early in retirement have been slightly insulated from those potential negative impacts because the market has carried a lot of that weight. But it can very quickly go the opposite direction, hence the whole theme of this podcast, right? The timing of those returns really do matter. But just making that point that it's not necessarily just the timing of the market returns, but it's the timing of your withdrawals and the degree in which you're taking those withdrawals as well.
Yeah. So do you have enough cash set aside? Is that withdrawal strategy that you have somewhat flexible, right? And do you have money in 3 buckets to kind of support that? And then are you coordinating those withdrawals with your overall tax picture too? You know, if you're not sure, that's why you reach out. We'll talk through it.
That's it. Yep.
All right, pal. Enjoy your holiday weekend.
You do the same.
Catch you next time.
Thanks.
Hey everyone, Adam and I really appreciate you tuning in. Please note that the opinions we voiced in the show are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific recommendations for any individual. To determine which strategies or investments may be most appropriate for you, consult with your attorney, your accountant, and financial advisor or tax advisor prior to making any decisions or investing. Thanks for listening.